We all set.
All right, meeting recording has started.
Perfect. Just let people jump on. Hey, Christina.
Hey, I'm at Denver Water and the Wi-Fi is worse here than it is at home. So just let me know if you notice any connection issues.
Okay.
Yeah.
Happens everywhere. We'll just give it our standard couple minutes to let people trickle in before we do the roll call and get going. Hey, Christy.
Hi, Amy. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yep. I'm going to put it on mute.
Okay, perfect. I'm just waiting a few minutes, Courtney and Angela, to see if we can make sure we have a quorum. We might be kind of tight, and I know Pat Dorsey is going to be a little bit late, so we could always hold any action items till later or push the adoption of the meeting minutes.
Yeah, sure thing. And I see Ben Tisdall emailed and said he'll be a bit late too.
Yeah, and perfect. There's Commissioner Shattuck McNally, so we might be okay.
Yeah, at this moment, we just need one more for quorum. So as you said, as people come in, maybe we have more of our action items then.
I know we'll get there. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start just with a roll call, and then Courtney, you can help me with the quorum, making sure we kind of have that buttoned up. But instead of a roll call, I'll just list who I have. So myself, Amy Moyer, Brett Wolk, Christina Burry, Christy Belton, Commissioner Cooper, I believe is still on, perfect, Commissioner Shattuck McNally, Julie Stencil, and then Kirk Will is our representative filling in for Vaughn Jones. Did I miss anyone, Courtney?
No, and in that case, we do have quorum. I didn't
do.
realize, Kirk, that you were filling in for Vaughn. So.
Perfect. So in terms of our agenda today, I'll go over a quick review. We can entertain a motion to adopt the August meeting minutes. Courtney will give a quick update on the all programs spreadsheet that DNR has been working on and has been some of the focus of some of our discussions and some action items from last meeting. We'll also have Diana Selby, who's here with the Colorado State Forest Service, give just a quick update on any of their programming and funding news. And then we'll kick off a little bit of where we left off with leveraging resources aimed at capacity challenges and specifically some of the workforce conversations that we discussed at the last meeting. And Christina Burry will give an overview of some of her lessons learned with participation on the U.S. Forest Service Capacity Subcommittee. And then at the end, we'll tee up a conversation about potentially thinking through some recommendations of how we can use state dollars as a a better leverage point to access federal funding. With large scale infusions on both sides, we may have opportunities to better leverage state funding in order to capture more federal funding. So that's a little bit of the layout today, but I think we'll start with entertaining a motion to accept the August meeting minutes.
I'll move to approve.
I'll second. Christy Belton.
Great. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
And that passes unanimously. So I will give just a very quick recap. And looks like we're about to have Pat Dorsey join of some of our discussions from last meeting. And where we left things was thinking through the Leveraging Resources Subcommittee and how we can complement some of the capacity and workforce discussions that are taking place within the Legislative Recommendation Subcommittee. And this conversation has played out in a few ways. Again, we'll hear some updates from Courtney on the DNR All Programs spreadsheet. One of the conversations was, we might take a closer look at some of the funding programs that have opportunities to fund capacity needs and tailor some recommendations of how do we better leverage those opportunities or figure out ways to connect communities with resources that may address some capacity needs. And then secondly, continuing to think through strategies of the spreadsheet is a wonderful tool, but those programs are constantly changing, and we also need to focus on connecting our communities with people, and those are the collaboratives, those are the Colorado State Forest Service field offices. And so having some strategies of making sure that these funding streams work well together and that we're using the spreadsheet and other tools in terms of our human resources to drive people to these funding opportunities. And then secondly, what we've talked about already a little bit in terms of a recap is continuing to dive into some of the capacity issues that seems to really rise to the top amongst the Forest Health Council as a whole, amongst the leveraging, our subcommittee, leveraging resources, and then also the legislative recommendations. So again, we'll spend a decent time today thinking about how we can look at that barrier and topic from this angle of how do we best develop recommendations or strategies to leverage resources. And again, I think, our role as this subcommittee is to really think through what are the recommendations and strategies that we can bring to either the full Forest Health Council to include in the annual report and recommendations to the state of Colorado leadership, or through the legislative recommendation process that Commissioner Shattuck McNally has been leading as part of that subcommittee, and as we've been working through for the first time as a council. So that's my quick summary, and unless there are any immediate questions for the group, I can turn it over to you, Courtney, for an update on the spreadsheet.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. I'm happy to share an update on the funding compilation that DNR has been maintaining. I'm going to share it with you all again. I thought I could give a brief overview of the updates that the spreadsheet has gotten since our last meeting where you guys recommended some changes. And then maybe we could have a conversation about the future of either this document or other documents that the committee might think are more important. So I'm dropping it in the chat. And as someone recommended, as this whole committee is interested in workforce development and capacity, someone recommended at our last meeting that I pull out a column that just highlights the programs and funding opportunities that can support capacity or personnel. And so I've added that column, and it does seem like the majority of the programs listed do support capacity or personnel. So, I didn't even realize that when I first made it. So I'm really glad we pulled it out because now everyone can see that more clearly, which is helpful. There's a few new programs in here, like the new Community Wildfire Defense Grant. And I've been working with, I think BLM to add one of their cost share programs, but that's not quite in the final draft yet. It's still sort of in a working process. So those are some of the updates to the funding compilation. And I know there's been conversations about what other resources are useful to people and should they belong in this sheet somewhere else. And so Angela had this great idea. And it's really to step back and ask, what's the best product that this committee thinks, the state could use? And originally there had been a talk about maybe like a playbook, a pre-fire playbook similar to the post-fire playbook that's been developed. And so I thought there could be a bigger conversation about if this playbook is what's really needed, or if you guys want, I can definitely put together another tab or spreadsheet that just speaks to resources that either communities or individuals can use when thinking about preparing for fire and mitigating for fire.
Any comments, questions for Courtney? I think especially on sort of the pre-fire playbook or what product is most useful, because we did have some good discussions at our last meeting of, as the Forest Health Council, could this be more inclusive of all forest health needs? But I will turn it over to the group for any comments and discussion.
I think the playbook idea is a good one. So on the post-fire recovery side, there was the post-fire playbook where Colorado Department of Health and Environment, I know with U.S. Forest Service and a number of counties and agencies, including water utilities, they worked together to come up with a really usable playbook. And so I think the value though in a playbook versus like this Excel, spreadsheet showing all the funding opportunities is identifying the roles. I think that is really beneficial in understanding not just the funding that's available, but almost like the technical assistance that entities can gain and who at the state is that role. So like what role does DNR play? What role does State Forest Service play? What role does DFPC play? And I think that's really beneficial for people to understand the roles and responsibilities of the different state agencies. And I think a playbook is a good way to do that. Just my thoughts, thanks.
Commissioner Cooper, you had your hand up, and then we'll go to Commissioner Shattuck McNally.
Thanks. I'm trying to think of a concise way to say this, but I think I'm just going to sort of try to briefly go through my experience most recently. And I guess this is to the point of, yes, a playbook would be helpful, but more. And that is that we are working on a substantial wildfire mitigation project in San Miguel County, really in the Telluride Valley. We have done a GIS, we did a forest health stakeholder group. Out of that came a GIS optimization analysis that Dr. Jason Seibold and a team at CSU did for us. It identified Mountain Village, which is one of our incorporated municipalities, as being extremely high risk of wildfire, and also their evacuation plan was not adequate because they only have one way in and one way out. So scary situation all around. It showed up as red on all of our maps. We're finally getting around to, but it's a highly controversial, the idea of cutting down forests in this area is really, really hard. And there's had to be, we have had to have a lot of background conversations to explain why it's necessary, good for forest health, can be done in a beneficial way, et cetera. We're at the point where we're developing a project with the U.S. Forest Service. We're starting to look at funding opportunities, especially for capacity building. West Region Wildfire Council, which is our wildfire council, has not had capacity, talking about capacity, but this is like administrative sort of facilitation capacity to really assist us. They've sort of been working with us, but they just haven't had the capacity to help Until recently, they just hired a partnership person, so maybe that will change. We don't have an updated CWPP. So we're basically just doing it ourselves, counties leading it. We looked at the forest health, forest restoration firmworm funds and want to apply. And I used this Colorado State Forest Atlas for the first time. It's available now and you can use it as a local tool. And lo and behold, it identifies our area as low to no risk. So probably won't elevate our project for funding by any means. And this is going to be the type of project that costs between like $25,000 and $40,000 an acre to do with very little viable commercial timber. So I guess in saying that, I still think that we need to, I don't know how the atlas was created. I don't know what layers went into it. I don't know the technology behind it. That to me is very interesting and I think would be helpful because that's obviously a significant resource out there that we should be leveraging. I just don't, I guess, understand how it works. And it's certainly not helpful to our efforts right now. And I'm not letting anybody know that it's out there because that's not going to help our effort at all to elevate this, project that's already going to be pretty controversial. So I guess a couple points, the Atlas, that's a resource that's existing and I would like to understand more about it. The idea of workforce to us is, it's not actually so much workforce that we need in this region. And I guess I don't really understand what others need. Is it boots on the ground? Is it people who are trained with chainsaws? Is it administrative assistants? I guess I need to understand a little bit more about workforce. If it's supporting our commercial industry in the Southwest has more work than they can manage right now. So I think a conversation needs to, we need to really dive into what kind of workforce we're trying to develop. And if it's just to support the industry, then that's problematic because that's not the only shop that we're going to need. So I don't know, with I guess with that I'm sort of putting more problems out there, but this identifying workforce as a leverage that we need to increase is not going to be helpful to my region. And if it's helpful to other regions, then great. I want to absolutely support that. But I also want to look at all of Colorado. And I think that it sounds to me like that workforce thing is maybe more of a front range need, which I absolutely want to support, and it's urgent. And that's the area that's red on the Atlas, by the way. But let's not forget of all of Colorado and forest health needs.
Thanks, Commissioner Cooper. Those are great comments. And I think we'll dive a little bit into the workforce conversations and will be great to tee up just all of the different needs across the state. And I know Diana Selby was going to respond specifically to the Forest Atlas and furworm question, but that may be a great discussion to have of when and how that Forest Atlas data set might get updated. But Diana, I'll turn it over for you to quickly respond, and then we'll go to Commissioner Shattuck McNally.
Yeah, thanks. I won't go into the details of the Colorado Forest Atlas. There's a lot to explain with that, but it is a statewide data. So just keep in mind that, to prioritize areas across the entire state, some are going to be higher priority, and there's always going to be those local areas that might show up as high priority when you're local planning, but may not look that way on the Forest Atlas. And that doesn't mean you should not apply or that you don't think it will be an elevated project, because we do recognize that as it's statewide data. It may not be perfect. And so we do ask that if applicants have, better CWPP maps or other, more localized maps. So if you have something that's showing up as hey, you did some planning and it's all showing up as red, you can attach that to your application. And so that, you know, even though it may show up as lower priority in the Atlas map, you can attach additional maps to kind of, you know, make that justification that it is a high priority for your particular area. So again, I'm not going to get into the details of the Forest Atlas. That's something we update every about 5 years. So, you know, the data layers are probably going to stay as they are for a little while, but they will eventually be updated just as we gather more data. So,
Commissioner Shattuck McNally, want to go ahead?
Thank you. I appreciate that, Amy. I know Commissioner Cooper's comments about workforce. I think it's, well, I'll address that first. So the first reason I raised my hand was when we talk about all these agencies working together on forest health, I wanted to kind of make sure we're looking not only at state, federal, and local partners and federal partners, but also some of these municipalities and big Thompson and big watershed coalitions, because we have some folks in our county that are from out of the county, in a municipality that owns water that is from outside of our county that's doing a lot of mitigation work, aerial mulching, like I think they're up to 4,000 acres now. And they're doing a lot of work in our county that we're not really coordinating with. We kind of coordinate, but we really aren't sometimes, I feel, always at the table, or I understand all the scope of that work. And so I think that's also something that maybe should be in that playbook, is how municipalities who aren't in that area but have a stake like water or other land, that they're involved with mitigation for forest health work. We need to kind of know who is all in these forests and doing what work. Even if it's on private land, I think it's good to know all the places and partners and players who are involved, because we could duplicate, or we could be working at crosshairs. They could be doing one thing that's out of sequence of work, right? That we would be doing. So or other people would be doing. And I just think it'd be better to try to coordinate or at least communicate with those folks. In the pre-planning, you know, I think that's a great idea. We did a risk assessment after Cannon Peak fire, and pretty much all the areas that we looked at and rated as risk, high risk, it's happening. It's happened. It's 2 years. Everything that we predicted and were worried about has happened. And like I said, we have a lot of areas that we need to try to work on that are next to these areas that didn't get burned, but are kind of the next fuel source for another fire. And as I look outside, I can't see the foothills because I'm assuming the smoke out there is from the California fires. So, and then with workforce, you know, maybe there's more work than people can do right now, but the workforce that we're talking about, legislative committee, is helping high school students and other folks go through these programs to help build the capacity so we have enough people to do the work. Because a lot of, we are hearing from the Forest Service and other folks, they were 400 people short. They couldn't hire 400 people for the work in the Forest Service. And then other agencies say they don't have enough people to do the work. So I think that's the conversation about workforce, is getting enough people to do the work. We've had a lot of conversations with that in the legislative subcommittee. And so just all those things in a nutshell, I guess, just kind of wanted to comment on that. But I am concerned about getting information about all the partners and everyone that's working in these forests, or it's on private, federal, or state lands. We need to kind of know what all the work that everyone's doing so we can coordinate.
Brett, you have your hand up. Do you want to go next?
Sure. I guess I had two things. I had one, thanks to Courtney and other people at DNR, I think the spreadsheet has come along well. So we kind of started off this conversation. My suggestion as far as that as a resource is, I wonder if it would help, and this is sort of how I view the world, but also articulating sort of the goals and objectives, or what the outcome of each grant program is hoping to accomplish. Because there's some that are like defensible space or protecting homes. And then there's like the Restore grant, which is restoring wildlife habitat, which are very different kind of goals that someone like Commissioner Cooper or other folks on the call could say, like, we're try and protect Mountain Village, and it's, you know, that's our primary purpose. So it might help people focus that. And then another thing that is being added is sort of what are their measures of success within each grant program? Like what do you know, what's the bar, or how are they? But I would like to see how you're measuring it, but that might be too far down in the details that you're getting, but at least something about what are the goals of the program. And then I think on the broader conversation, I really appreciate hearing some of the county commissioners and other folks on the call on some of the challenges you're going through. And I think a pre-fire playbook could be a really good thing. I'm having a lot of conversations kind of internally with my staff and hearing the similar conversation around the state of not just a pre-fire playbook and a post-fire playbook, but how do you connect this planning across pre-fire, during, and post-fire, right? Because there's some areas where maybe we're not going to be able to do a lot of pre-fire management, and you want to start post-fire planning right now. And I think that conversation keeps coming up a lot more. So as far as leveraging resources on this committee, I wonder if we want to, that might complicate things or simplify it. I'm not sure yet. I wanted to throw that idea out there of, instead of thinking of just a pre-fire playbook, how do we connect pre-fire and post-fire kind of activities into a forest planning playbook, right? Forest health planning playbook, something like that. So those are, I'm trying to go that direction in small steps. I don't know if, again, that might overcomplicate it at this stage, but.
I'll let Pat go, but I just wanted to respond to Brett real quick, because I think the timing on this could be really good in the sense that I think CWCB and Chris Sturm's folks are having some really similar conversations around their wildfire ready watersheds work. And Brett, I think they've been talking to you guys perhaps a bit about this, but for folks who aren't familiar, the Colorado Water Conservation Board is basically developing, they're really going deeper on the post-fire side of things, in the sense that they're looking to identify those areas that may be particularly vulnerable to post-fire flooding, debris flows, et cetera, so that communities can, you know, zero in on those places and do some of this planning. But, you know, I've talked with him a lot about, well, could those also be places that you are prioritizing, you know, some mitigation work so that hopefully your fire impacts are not as bad. Anyway, I think there could be some great crossover there. And so if this group has specific recommendations, those staff at CWCB could potentially support something like this, like a broad, you know, pre and post fire playbook, basically combining what we already have with the post fire playbook with something that includes mitigation and examples of, you know, CWP, or is it CWP squared? Basically, community wildfire protection plans that have that water protection component embedded as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Angela. Yeah, those are some of the things I was thinking of, as well as the CWCB, as an example, looks at post-fire, but also pre-fire, and how do you connect the two. But it also speaks to some of Commissioner Shattuck-Manali's points of who cares about this landscape in a sense of like who's invested in it, right? And who do you need to bring at the table? Maybe bringing some folks post-fire in earlier would be better, and also in the post-fire sense, bringing other people in to that conversation that you might not have thought of, and making it more expansive and inclusive in a also more focused way. But I'm still, it would be tough to develop those kind of resources because of there's so much, as Commissioner Cooper was saying, there's so much nuance with every state and every project and every kind of issue, not every state, but every, you know, county or area. I could see a general playbook, and I think the post-fire one would be a good model for us to shoot for, but yeah, it takes some work to figure out how to make it work.
Thanks, Brett. And Pat, thanks so much for your patience. I'll turn it over to you, and just wanted to say thanks also, Commissioner Tisdale, for jumping on.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. I was just going to say a couple of things. One is I like the idea of the playbook, and I like the idea of having the Excel spreadsheet or that resource available. Also, I think a couple of things are necessary. I mean, we've seen it, there are new funding sources come available, or deadlines will change, or the amount of money will change, or you know, some sources go away. So the ability to be dynamic and flexible is important, even in the playbook. The other thing I would add, and it's tangential, but I just sort of want to get it on the board here for both committees, as Chair McNally is on, the Colorado Forest Collaborative Network held their first meeting in Durango on September 1st, and the issues that emerged meeting is the lack of capacity for collaborative funding in the way of a, you know, facilitator or administrative support or whatever you want to call that. And I think as we become more and more dependent on cross-boundary work and collaboration, that if there's a way that we as a group could shore up funding so those collaboratives aren't out beating the bushes every year to keep a facilitator on for 26 more weeks or something like that, it would be really, really valuable for the state.
That's a great point, Pat. And we can move on to Diana to give a quick update from the Colorado State Forest Service. But I think there is broad interest from this group of exploring what a pre-flyer playbook would look like, and maybe starting in that direction and using the all programs spreadsheet as a nice launching off point, and then continuing to see how that can expand into this, you know, broader playbook and connection that Brett mentioned of pre-fire planning, post-fire, and how all of those different sectors and stakeholders are connected, and also staying in coordination with CWCB as they develop their wildfire ready watersheds effort. So thanks, Courtney, for teeing that up for us. And I will turn it over to Diana just for a quick update on your end.
Thanks. So I'm assuming you just were interested in updates on what the Colorado State Forest Service has as far as programs. So, you know, we have a lot of legislation was passed this past year. These are going to be new programs, so they're not currently on Courtney's list, but they will be at some point. So there's our wildfire mitigation resources and best practices grant, and that's sort of grants that will be for outreach, so for communities to use for outreach and education related to wildfire mitigation. That's $300,000 total, so for the program, so it's going to be small grants, like $10,000 grants. And again, that program, I think we will receive that funding by next year. So I think that's when we'll start that program. We also have the wildfire mitigation incentives for local governments. That's the $10 million program that will provide a match to local governments that are, you know, I guess, finding funding that, you know, usually is going to be through passage of like, you know, a fee or something like that, so that they are doing that wildfire mitigation work. And so there's already counties and others that have done that. And so this will just be sort of a state match to that. Again, that one's in process. So we'll have that program really launched by next March is our timeline for that. So that will be another one that will be added on there. There's not a lot to update you on with some of these right now. Just again, we haven't, you know, we're in the middle of hiring some positions to kind of take some of these on. So the wildfire prevention, oh, sorry, this is another, I won't go into that one. That one's sort of we're going to handle that one a little bit differently. So the only other thing I think that would be helpful to update folks on would be, we do have through the Colorado Recovery Act, we received funding for a Healthy Forest Vibrant Communities funds, which covers a variety of different things. And so some of that is CWPP support. So we do plan to have some kind of, I don't know if it's going to be a grant or awards that will be rolling out. Again, that's our staff working with their local field offices and deciding, you know, how that's going to come about. So that's going to be another program that probably won't be like announced externally, but will be kind of run through the Colorado State Forest Service. So again, I think it was maybe Christina that mentioned, the really sort of highlighting the roles and the different kind of resources that different organizations can provide, I think would be really super critical, because we do have a lot of things that are happening. They're going to change. Some of these are going to drop off. Some of them are going to continue. So I think for communities, just being able to be in touch with the right people to be able to lead them down. Here's where, if you're looking for funding, if you're just looking for someone to help you write a CWPP, here's another resource. So I know that it's not always money for the work on the ground that communities are looking for. So that's kind of, I think that was a good point made about the idea of the or the pre-fire playbook and how that might work. So, just really identifying those roles. We also have a increased wildfire risk mitigation outreach effort. So that's something that our Communications and Communities Division is working on with multiple partners. That's going to be just sort of an outreach campaign to get information out there, wildfire risk, and how what resources are there. So those are efforts that are going to happen. That's slated to happen next May, and then the following May as well. That's sort of a one-time, here's some funding to do these, and that will end. And then of course we always have the Forest Restoration and Wildfire Risk Mitigation Grant Program. That one has an annual $8 million allocation, so that one will continue to roll out, but this year it's currently open, closes in early October, I believe, and has about 15 million available. So there's quite a bit of funding available this year for that particular program. And I think those are the kind of the highlights that I will hit on. Obviously, some folks have talked about various federal funding, and there's a lot happening with that. Most of the federal funds that are running through the State Forest Service, so state and private forestry programs, probably folks won't see anything specific, but we will be, utilizing that fund to support a variety of different activities that kind of align with our state and private forestry programs. So I don't know if there's a need to get into like any details on that one, but that's kind of where we're at with just some generic like timelines and updates on State Forest Service, if that's helpful.
Thanks, Diana. Commissioner Cooper, did you have a question?
One quick one on this, the increased wildfire risk, I didn't quite catch it. Is that a campaign that the state is doing or providing dollars locally for education and awareness?
So there's a couple of things. There's one that's a grant program that will be grants for others to apply for to do outreach and that kind of wildfire mitigation outreach. Then there's also a campaign sort of outreach efforts that the state is working with partners and collaborative groups, and will do internally, so that you'll maybe see some of the results of that, but not necessarily like other people will be applying for that. So there's two going on with that. The grants that are going to be available for outreach, like I said, there's only 300,000 total for that program. And that one, like I said, I think right now the language in the legislation says something like $10,000 grants or something like that. So there would be, potentially like 30 grants on an annual basis for those kind of efforts. And that again is not fully developed yet. So we don't have all the information and details and eligibility and stuff yet, but that will be rolled out by next spring.
And then just one follow-up question for Diana. Is there a directive or a policy at the State Forest Service to work in collaboration or to be a partner with local wildfire mitigation or forest health mitigation collaboratives? Is there direction that sort of regional state forest offices should or must participate in those efforts? Or is that just kind of something that's understood and we hope that it's happening?
I think it's primarily understood and should be happening. And if you feel like you've got collaborative efforts going on and you haven't had participation, you've been requesting, State Forest Service partners to to be involved, then, you know, we can talk about that offline, I suppose. But I think for the most part, that's sort of happening just organically across the state.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks so much, Diana. I appreciate that update, and it's helpful just to stay on top of all of the new funding streams that are coming online. I do want to transition to talk a little bit more about how this committee can focus on leveraging resources specific to some of the capacity barriers that have already been discussed today and continue to be top tier issues for the Forest Health Council. And so to kick us off, I'm going to turn it over to Christina Burry, who's been participating on the U.S. Forest Service Capacity Subcommittee that we talked a little bit at the end of our last meeting. So let's turn it over to you, Christina.
Sure. I'm going to share my screen, so bear with me. So this subcommittee, it was a national subcommittee that originally began with the prescribed fire pause from the U.S. Forest Service. So essentially during this pause, there were a few different subcommittees tasked with identifying how to improve prescribed fire moving forward for the U.S. Forest Service. One of the subcommittees was specifically focused on capacity. So it was focused on prescribed fire. However, I think there was a recognition that there was a lot of crossover, not just for prescribed fire, but more of the pre-fire mitigation piece. Looking at that separately from wildfire response or suppression activities for the agency. So I think it was eye-opening for me because I've heard, you know, just in the years I've been doing forest to faucets and spending the Denver water money on forest treatments through U.S. Forest Service and State Forest Service. We have like $4 million unspent funds just sitting, waiting to be, you know, implemented. And I've heard from our folks, like especially on the White River and Summit County and Grand County, that capacity is the biggest constraint in spending those dollars and getting the work done. And so my mind has always just stopped there. Like, well, why doesn't the U.S. Forest Service hire more people or the State Forest Service hire more people? The issue is not just the lack of hiring. It is the fact that they cannot retain or get staff on day one of hiring. So what I'm sharing now is just the recommendations that went to the chief of the U.S. Forest Service from this capacity subcommittee. So I haven't heard, once these have been submitted, I haven't heard what the chief is actually, you know, going to move forward. But these recommendations were based on a lot of agency folks, folks that were county commissioners, folks like myself with utilities. So it seems like the biggest barriers to actually getting the staff needed is housing and pay. So I know it sounds simple, but some of the recommendations that came out of the capacity subcommittee was focusing on funding line items for housing for non-fire folks, and also establishing specific hiring or capacity building for non-fire staff. Some of the critiques to that, however, which I think are valid, is we already see kind of a disconnect in thinking about forest resilience between like the fire suppression folks and the pre-fire folks, that there isn't a lot of communication between the two different sides of the fence. And so there would be, you know, a staffing up perhaps of like a pre-fire mitigation crew, whether that's through the state, U.S. Forest Service at the local level. But would there be still a disconnect on informing where those treatments go and how that informs fire response? And so that was one thing this group weighed is, well, should we hire more of like kind of a jack of all trades, like people with their red card certification, but can also cut trees? I think in the end, it was decided by this group that there should be a focused hiring effort on the pre-fire mitigation side, but in considering pay. So a lot of folks, I guess, want to be on the fire suppression side because they get hazard pay. They get, more money, more financial incentive, where on the pre-fire side of the hiring, they don't get that hazard pay. So is there a way to look at incentivizing or somehow increasing pay in creative ways, similar to hazard pay for fire responders? I think the housing, we talked about in the near term, could we leverage different housing units, like let's say, Denver Water owns a significant amount of land and houses, and we rent houses out. So could we leverage some of those resources in the meantime? But just hearing, I think I'll state the statistic and then, pause and see what thoughts people have and what questions people have. But just hearing from the U.S. Forest Service that they go through the hiring process and select the candidate, and only 50% of the candidates that they go to hire start on day one. And it's because of housing and pay. So I think those things hopefully will be addressed through some of the money in the bipartisan infrastructure law. I think creating a housing line item. But I think from the state's perspective is where can the state help leverage resources, whether that's actual like housing, where we can move the needle for more affordable housing opportunities. And just thinking about, again, pay and maybe leveraging some of the staff, whether that's DNR, State Forest Service, DFPC, to address some of the severe hiring challenges that they're having at the federal level. So thank you.
Brett, I'll turn it over to you and then Commissioner Cooper.
Quick question, Christina, is the focus on housing in pay, is that more on the seasonal staff or these long-term permanent positions? Because there are different kinds of housing we're looking at.
Permanent housing. It is more of a focus on permanent. And that was discussed too, which is they really want to get away from seasonal hiring and want to move towards more permanent hiring. Because I guess it does take a lot of capacity to get all these seasonals hired, and then they're gone in a few months. And so can they get more flexibility for permanent positions, but they need permanent housing in order for that to happen.
Commissioner Cooper?
One response to that is in the Farm Bill, there is right now in the Farm Bill's up for renewal next year. It's being rewritten, no, next year, anyway, sometime really soon. There's a title that allows the Forest Service to partner with local communities using admin lands. That's a very specific classification for housing. So they would provide the land and it's either in a long-term lease program or a situation or whatever. There's been there's been limited communities in Colorado that have been able to take advantage of that because of the admin classification. Also, it was brand new. So the Forest Service was, a little hesitant to sort of go all in to adopt it. But I wonder if that's something that we could flag and certainly encourage and maybe get feedback statewide, maybe eventually from the governor or from us, whoever, to the USDA as they're updating the Farm Bill to make that tool more readily available, so that, because land in many of our mountain communities is what is the sort of cost prohibitive part of building housing. So just one note for maybe an action we can take in the future. Also, back to that sort of capacity building, I was trying to get to that. Thank you, whoever just spoke to it way more. I think it was Christina, way more eloquently than I did, or articulately. To me, that sort of administrative capacity is a really big piece of this. And I guess in all the conversations when I've heard about workforce capacity, I'm hearing, and maybe I just assumed, and I shouldn't make that assumption, that it's more, people with chainsaws. That's not so much what we need in our community, or it's that, and that administrative collaborative partnership, tracking grants, writing grants, reporting on grants, working the collaboratives, bringing partners together, all of that is the part that we are really struggling with in order to get projects done. So I guess I just don't want to lose track of that. When we talk about sort of assistance to, technical schools and stuff, it's kind of that higher level admin management that is very much needed also. So let's not lose track of that. Also, National Forest Foundation is a group that's being put forward by at least the GMUG as sort of that collaborative building partner. And I just wonder if I don't know if anybody from the National Forest Foundation is in our group, but let's not forget at that as a leveraged resource. And then the playbook, just to get back to this, one of the things that we're really struggling with is our county wants to do a land use code update, and we have our neighbors to the north, Uray, that's done an excellent one. The challenge with our planning staff is that we need to incorporate it into our land use code. And for whatever reason, every county's land use codes are very, very different, and they're written technically very, very differently. So when we were provided with kind of a land use code template, it's very difficult to put that into our land use code, very difficult and time consuming. So those types of resources that will help local communities prepare in advance, and then, hopefully help with that post-fire recovery piece as well. Just to expand on kind of that playbook and what is needed. It's not so much the land use code templates or maybe the building code piece that I think the state is probably going to help with in the future. It's more technical assistance to help us interpret that into our own land use codes. And then just one huge one that I'm going to throw out is President Biden's old growth directive. And I don't know if that has come up yet, but it's pretty substantial, and it's directly related to forest health. And then by healthier forests, you're creating more wildfire resilient forests that recover faster post-fire, et cetera. And I guess I just wonder if we could flag that, and I still want to flag that Colorado State Forest Atlas for a future agenda item to discuss a little bit more.
Commissioner Cooper, can you repeat the President Biden directive? I missed just quickly, and then I'll turn it over to Commissioner Tisdale.
Yeah, it is called the President Biden's executive order to strengthen America's forests, boost wildfire resilience, and combat global deforestation. It was done on April 22nd, birthday, 2022. And I'm in several discussions right now about just how we interpret that or implement it at the local level. There's a lot of, big sort of questions of, what do you mean by old growth? Is that just Pacific Northwest old growth, or do our 100-year-old forests count as old growth kind of thing? So it's not one to solve in the next 6 minutes. It's just one that I'm in the midst of a lot of conversations right now about how we bring this into Colorado to implement, to take advantage of the resources that are available. And then, obviously to protect our old growth forests. So just something to flag in the future.
Thanks. Commissioner Tisdale?
Yeah, can you guys hear me? Yeah, okay. One of the things that upcoming, it's not published yet, but there were 2 facilitated learning analysis reports that came out of the 2 escaped prescribed fires that happened during the 90-day strategic pause on prescribed burns that Christina mentioned. One of them's published, one of them's not, and I haven't seen the guidance, any new guidance come out of the U.S. Forest Service yet, but I think the Forest Service chief was going to publish some, or Christina, maybe I haven't seen it, or you've seen it, but
I haven't seen it yet. I'm not sure. I haven't heard anything back from this subcommittee coordinator or leader on when to expect that.
okay. So it's expected soon. I understand. I was on one of those FLA teams because the fire was in Ouray County, and so that's the one that hasn't been published yet. But as soon as that's published, there's a lot of material in that I think could inform our discussions on how to approach prescribed fires. They need to be staffed at the same level as suppression, which adds more to more pressure to the housing and the staffing levels. The agencies need to work together better, where they have opportunities to do that between the federal agencies even. So there's when we maybe I expect that'll be published by our next session of this meeting, and maybe we could all have a read through that. And I can, once it's published, I can certainly highlight some of the things and the messages that might appear to be between the lines, but let's pay attention to that space.
That's a great flag, and we can keep an eye out for those reports, or if anyone sees them, can pass them around to the group. I do want to wrap up just since we're getting close to 1, and we can table agenda item 6, which was just teeing up a discussion of how potentially we could best use the funding programs we have at the state level, that we may have more opportunities to be nimble to capture federal funding. So I think that will be a great topic we can add to future agendas and really blends into some of our discussion today. But I think for next meeting, we can, continue to flesh out this recommendation to create a pre-fire playbook, and one that connects across the whole forest health planning spectrum. It'd be great to continue to pick back up these workforce issues and maybe look again at how, some of the recommendations that you shared, Christina, what would be the state level equivalents to really complement some of those efforts. And then I think it would be great to dive in a little bit more to some of the pieces that Commissioner Cooper highlighted of the Farm Bill inclusion for admin lands and how best to utilize that, or get feedback from communities on what barriers exist or what would be a state equivalent for something like that. I noted the President Biden executive order that we can dive into a little bit more. We can tee up those prescribed fire reports and how that plays into capacity challenges based on those recommendations to staff up. And then I still have on the table to Commissioner Cooper to think about the Forest Health Atlas and some better processes as that may get updated here in the next few years, and some recommendations that we might want to recommend for that process and how it plays into leveraging resources and is a factor in decision making on a funding level. So that is my quick kind of summary of where we might go next, and I will work with others on this committee and Angela and Courtney to put together an agenda for next month when we'll meet October 3rd. And then Angela, I'll turn it over to you for any final thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. And sorry, I don't have my camera on, some issues today, but the one thing I wanted to flag while I was out these last couple of weeks on vacation, Courtney sent around a draft annual report that we put together. We didn't receive any comments on it, and so I just wanted to flag that for this group. If anybody still wants to make comments on it, please email us today if you can. We'll send out a reminder email this afternoon to the whole council. We do know from our AAG support that the whole council will need to vote to approve the report. So we're trying to figure out what makes sense in terms of hosting an all council meeting to do that. And we don't want to waste anybody's time. But I think we'd also like to get it done before our next meeting, which I think is at the end of October. So keep an eye out for that. But again, if you have any comments on that annual plan, please just ping us today. Thanks.
Thanks, Angela, and thanks to everyone for joining today. Some really great discussions, and really helps us move our conversations forward, and I will see you all next month.